It can happen in the blink of an eye, an accident that leaves someone with a serious trauma. As paramedics, you're among the first people to help the patient on the journey to recovery. Your role is crucial to get to the patient quickly, provide initial care, and rapidly get the patient to the right hospital. Seriously injured patients have better outcomes when treated in a major trauma center, and time to definitive care matters for some patients. This is when an air ambulance may be able to help. But how do you know? By using the Provincial Field Trauma Triage Standard, also known as the FTTS, and the Air Ambulance Utilization Standard. It's actually pretty simple. Say you've arrived at the scene and your patient has, or you think the patient has, a serious trauma. First, ask yourself whether the injuries or mechanism of injury meet the Field Trauma Triage Standard. Then, ask yourself whether the drive time is greater than 30 minutes to the lead trauma hospital. If the answer is yes, then you've met the Air Ambulance Utilization Standard requirement for requesting air ambulance response by Ornge. Paramedics typically know to call for Ornge if the patient is in a remote location, or if there are multiple casualties, or a prolonged extrication. They tend to avoid calling Ornge if they think the weather is bad, or they think the helicopter will not make it to the scene before they depart with the patient. And often Ornge is cancelled when the paramedics depart the scene with the patient, even if the patient is seriously injured. This can be a missed opportunity. Why? Well, let's look at each of the factors. First, what if the weather is bad? While aircraft can't fly in every kind of weather, bad weather should not deter you from requesting air response. Scene responses are one of the highest priorities for Ornge. It's up to Ornge to determine whether it's safe to respond. So just call. Ornge will check. Second, what if the lead trauma hospital is far away? This is common in rural and northern Ontario, where distances are long. If your patient has serious injuries, and you are more than a 30-minute drive from the lead trauma hospital, call Ornge from the scene before you depart for the hospital. Community hospitals are not ideally equipped to provide the definitive management for seriously injured trauma patients. If the paramedics call Ornge early, hospital staff won't need to spend as much time arranging a patient transfer, meaning they can spend more time caring for the patient. Early activation of Ornge also means that the Ornge paramedics will arrive at the community hospital earlier, so that the patient arrives at definitive care faster. Paramedics in rural or remote areas of Ontario have a unique opportunity to contribute to better patient outcomes by reducing time to definitive care, sometimes by hours. So, when should I or should I not cancel Ornge? If Ornge has been activated by the Central Ambulance Communication Centre, or CAC, for scene response, and your patient does not meet the criteria listed in the Field Trauma Triage Standard, then cancel Ornge. If your patient does meet the Field Trauma Triage Standard and the helicopter has not yet arrived, proceed to the local receiving hospital. Do not wait for the helicopter unless you have confirmation that it is on final approach. Do not cancel the aircraft if your patient meets the Field Trauma Triage Standard and you are leaving the scene. Ornge can then meet you at the local receiving hospital and contribute to the care of that patient as a modified scene response. There is another option that may be available to you, meeting the aircraft somewhere in the middle. If you're transporting the patient as a Code 4 or CTAS 1 or 2, and you still have a long distance to transport to the local hospital, contact the CAC and suggest a rendezvous location where the helicopter can land and accept your patient. A rendezvous can be completed only if your patient meets the FTTS and the air ambulance is able to land along the direct route of the land ambulance, and it would result in a significant reduction in transport time to the most appropriate hospital, typically the lead trauma hospital. To recap, be familiar with the Field Trauma Triage Standard and Air Ambulance Utilization Standard. By calling Ornge early, you have an opportunity to contribute to better patient outcomes by minimizing the patient's time to definitive care. If you are departing the scene with a seriously injured patient and Ornge hasn't arrived yet, consider asking your CAT to redirect the helicopter for a rendezvous or to the local hospital for a modified response. And finally, don't let bad weather deter a request for air response. Let Ornge decide when it's safe to respond. Everything you've heard today supports the system goal of bringing critically injured trauma patients to definitive care as soon as possible.